Hey guys, the Dude's Corner here. Today I'm going to be teaching you the second method of edge pairing, freestyle. First off, this next portion of the video is going to be in all three of these parts, so if you've already seen this, feel free to skip to that point of the video, because I'm going to be using this clip to explain all three of the different methods and how they work. However, I would recommend staying here if you haven't seen this before, because this is going to be very, very important information. The very first thing that is very important to learn for any form of edge pairing method is how do you build your centers. Now, for instance, reduction method is the most well-known method for when it comes to building your centers. By this point in time, when you have all 6 of your centers done, none of your edges will be built. The other method for building your centers is, of course, the Yao method. And in Yao method, when you build all 6 of your centers, you will also have your 4 cross edges done and in place. And then, of course, there's Hoya method, and there's the other method that I don't remember the name of, both of which I will not be talking about for their version of edge pairing because nobody cares about them, and they're really just not good in any way. So we're not going to be focusing on those. We're really going to be just focusing on reduction and Yao.
Now that we have covered what method you use to build your centers, let's go ahead and cover what method you should use to build your edges. Now there are 3 tutorials that I have posted, and each one is for each method. All 3 of these methods can be used to solve any cube from 4x4 to larger. And all 3 of these methods will be ultimately up to you to decide which method you should use for each cube. However, in just a moment I will give some recommendations for which method I think you should use for each cube, because some of these methods it is not smart to solve with on certain cubes. But for now, I can highly recommend that you should learn all 3 of these methods. That way you can determine which method you would like to use for each of your cubes.
Now, what is all the different methods and how do they all work? Well, the first method is called reduction. The second is called freestyle. The third is called Yao. And as you probably can guess, the first method is really meant for whenever you use reduction. The second method is kind of freestyle, and you actually can kind of use it for both. But personally, I think it's better for the reduction people. And then the Yao method is, of course, really meant for Yao and should not be used for the reduction way of building your centers. If you can't fully keep up, you'll definitely be able to in just a minute, because I'm going to go a lot more in detail. Now, if I am talking too fast, or if this tutorial any of these tutorials get very quick, I would recommend either slowing down the video in the video settings, because I am just going to be not taking this very slowly, because this is not in any way a beginner's method. This is really meant for advanced solvers, and if you can't fully understand what's going on, then you're probably not ready for this level of cubing experience. Beginner's tutorials will be down in the description. You'll be able to check those out if you are not at this level. Now, when it comes to the method number 1, I would recommend specifically 5x5, 6x6, and 7x7 for using this method only. For method 2, I would recommend using only 5x5 or 7x7 for this method. And method 3, I would only recommend 4x4 or 5x5. The reason why I recommend these, you'll be able to understand when I go later on into these tutorials, all 3 of them, and you'll clearly be able to tell why I recommend them. Now, the other stuff that I want to real quick talk about is the fact that all 3 of these methods use 5x5. So 5x5 is going to be the main cube that I will be talking about the most in all 3 of these tutorials, because it's the one that works for all 3 of these methods. The other thing that I want to real quick mention is the fact that when it comes to your last 4 edges, now this comes up for all 3 of these methods, I will not be talking about it, nor will I be talking about 3 cycle, last 2 edges, or parity. All of those need to have their own tutorials that I will post eventually, but probably not anytime soon. I already have posted last 2 edges, and it is kind of a beginner's method, but the tutorial will be down in the description if you need it. Also, for parity cases, the best way to solve parity, I will be posting a tutorial eventually on that relatively soon, so that'll be down in the description when that comes out. Okay, so we have covered so far a lot that is important, but what else is there that we should know before we just move on? Well, one of the main important things that we need to learn for all three of these methods is how do we flip an edge?
Now, there are many ways that you could flip an edge, and I'm sure you all have your own way of flipping an edge, and that is perfectly okay. I'm just going to be demonstrating with one simple way of flipping an edge that will not cause any problems anywhere else on the cube. So if you have your own way, that's perfectly okay. You can use it, just be careful when you use it. However, throughout all three of these tutorials, I will just be using this way for just demonstrations. But for showing you this algorithm, I'm just going to be demonstrating on this edge right here. And the algorithm is
R, U, R prime, U prime, Y rotation, L prime, U prime, L. And then, as we can see, this is flipped. This is a beginner's way of flipping an edge, but it does work and it's very good and it does not affect anything on the bottom layer, and that's specifically good for Yao. So I recommend using this across all three of these methods when you need them, when you need to flip an edge. Now you have selected the second method of edge pairing, and that is freestyle. Now, if you've not already seen the first method, that has already been out for a little while now, and I would recommend seeing that because I'm going to point out similarities between these two methods. You don't necessarily have to see it, but like I said earlier, it is a lot better if you learn all three of these methods because you can kind of choose which method works best for you and which cube you think it'll work best on. So let's go ahead and start. I personally, when I started learning advanced edge pairing, I really liked freestyle when I started doing it. It's, in my opinion, really good for 5x5 and 5x5 and 7x7. It's not good for 6x6 and 4x4, and you'll be able to see why in just a moment. So if you've already seen the freestyle method, it's going to work very similar in the way that we would bring our edges down and we would pair and we would not slice back. But instead, we're going to take this a little bit further with messing up our centers and pairing up our edges faster. So for instance, I notice we have these two here and this one here. We can bring it down here and we can pair it. Now in reduction, we would have to flip this edge and bring this then over. But flipping the edge can be very, very annoying. So instead, what we can do is we can just go ahead and turn it twice and then pair. Now, you've already probably noticed how much more this affected our centers, but as long as if we just continue doing these slices and keeping these in line pairs of 3, we're good. But let's go ahead and slice. But as long as if you're turning this twice and not once, you're never going to mess up these centers anymore. So, and then we just need to insert this into the top. And we have these two here. So for instance, here, once again, I would have to flip this edge and go through the trouble. But instead, I can just turn this twice, pair it. We have these two here. We can just go ahead and bring them down like this. And we have this one here that I already noticed. So we can just bring it into here so that they're lined up, of course. And there we go. And then also we have this edge here and this edge here. We can just pair it. We have this one here. All of it's going to work the same way as reduction. The only difference is the fact that when we need to flip an edge, we would turn it that side twice, the side that's not next to it, in order to pair instead of having to go through the trouble of flipping the edge. So first off, I will say this was probably a lot more different than what you were expecting. It's a lot faster in some senses of building your edges, but when you have to rebuild your centers, it's a lot longer than it would take in reduction, because reduction just takes a few moves to build your centers, and this, it only takes a few moves to build your edges. So it's really going to depend on which one you prefer. Now, when in this method, I would recommend holding yellow and white on bottom and on top. That way it's just a little easier to keep track. You don't necessarily have to, but it's a little easier to, when you have these two centers, or at least two centers you've decided to pick, to always have on top and on bottom throughout your solves, because if you ever accidentally mess up your centers, it's more easy to indicate that because you're more used to the 4 colors that are going to be along here This is just one extra little tip. If you're very far advanced or if you like being color neutral, then don't worry about it. Now, if you're already getting the hang of this method, you probably can already understand why I recommend using this method on only 5x5 and 7x7. The reason why I say this is because on even layer puzzles such as 4x4 and 6x6, they don't have one distinct centerpiece. And when turning things twice, refixing your centers takes even longer because you got to make sure they're in the right place. And that can completely mess up your solve. So that should make a little bit more sense why I only recommend this on 5x5 and 7x7. However, you can do it on 6x6, but especially don't do it on 4x4. Just trust me on that. Yale method is really the smartest way of doing it, and this method, when you do your cross edges, it's flipping them onto the other side, and it really just messes it up. So don't use this on 4x4, but if you really want to, you can use it on 6x6. I just personally would not recommend it. But anyway, that's 5x5. Let's go ahead and move on to 7x7. So we have these three here, and this is pretty nice to have. I'm going to hold yellow and white on bottom once again. We have these two here. This is a pretty obvious pair that we can just, pair these all up here. So we got this edge. And we're going to go ahead and look for the next pieces. We have these two here, this one here, and this one here. So we can go ahead and just bring this down. And here's the nice part, is the fact that it doesn't matter if we bring this in properly, because all we need to do is just do a double turn, and then it fixes it. So that's something that's also pretty nice. Like, for instance, when we were bringing this down here, it technically does need to be down in this spot, but that's fine, because all we need to do is just a double turn, and then it's fixed. So that's one of the other things that makes Freestyle a very helpful method. And then these ones are all in here, and we just need this one. So we can do, when we bring it up into here, instead of doing this, because that's not the right way of going, we can actually turn it back and then go ahead and pair. Then from here we can just continue, but it's pretty obvious where we go from here. It's all pretty much going to work the same way. A lot of Freestyle is going to be intuitive. It's not something that you're going to have to just take step by step, but something you're going to have to really just learn on your own. I gave you the principles of guides of how this will work. The last thing I just want to cover before the end of this video is how to fix your centers, because that can be pretty important. For building your centers back, there is a few different ways that you can do this. I have these two here and these two here. Generally, you're going to want to look at your middle line because that indicates what side needs to go where. So I notice I have this blue here, and generally what we could just do is just line this up back. But instead, I'm going to actually move this out of the way so that we keep this line in here. So then when we bring this down here, this puts the blue in, and we kept this red line here. Generally, you want to focus on just two. Don't focus on two of the others. Generally, I mostly look at red and blue. That's just me, but that's what I did in that case. And we have this line here and this here. Make sure you're not turning it anyway like this. Only doing double moves or single slice moves. So, and then we have this here and this here. So double move to turn this across, bring this up, move this back away, and then bring this back down, just like beginner's method. Then we have these here. This is pretty much going to work the same way. We're going to slice, double move, slice back, and then we can actually go ahead and move on to this side. It'll work the same way. So 5x5 is relatively simple, but what about 7x7? And sadly, it is going to be a little bit harder. Of course, you still have these last four edges, just a reminder, but that requires a different tutorial. Now for 7x7, it's pretty much going to work the same way. It's just going to take a little longer. So, and like I showed you earlier, after we've built all of our edges along the sides, we're just going to have to insert all of our lines here. And we have, generally, you probably don't want to try preserving any, like I showed on 5x5, unless you really want to go a little bit more advanced. But personally, if you're just starting learning Freestyle, I wouldn't really recommend doing that. So we can bring this one here, because I noticed we have this blue line here. We can just go ahead and solve blue. Blue is pretty simple. And we have red. We can insert this up here, turn this twice. Now this, we just insert back, and then we can go ahead and solve this pair. Turn it twice. And actually, if we want to, we can actually go ahead and solve this one at the same time. turn back, and then we'll fix both those. And then we just have this one line here. So 7x7, it works relatively similar, except it can certainly take a lot longer than 5x5. However, when it comes to pairing the edges, it's a lot faster than it was doing it in reduction method. So there you go. That is how you solve freestyle on 5x5 and 7x7. I'm sure you guys were probably expecting a bit more from this tutorial, but like I said, this is really one of those kinds of methods that you kind of are just going to have to learn from your own. The other methods are a little bit more step by step, but yeah, that is method 2, freestyle. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm sure I can help, or other people cubers can answer before I get to you. So feel free to ask questions down in the comment section. But anyway, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please remember to hit that like button down below and hit the subscribe button, as well as those bell notifications to be notified when upcoming videos are released. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.